Hello, Muslim friends in the world. This is not dawn. This is hell descending from the sky. Tel Aviv, the city that never truly sleeps, was now awake in a nightmare. At 3:27 a.m., the first sound came. Not an alarm, but a massive explosion that rocked the heart of the city. The sound of shattering glass, panicked screams, and the rumble of collapsing buildings echoed through narrow alleys and towering skyscrapers. In the sky, there were no stars, only the bright red flashes of Iranian ballistic missiles streaking through like fire-breathing dragons, obliterating anything in their path. The Iron Dome, the aerial shield long hailed as Israel's pride, fired interceptors into the air, but it was like rain against a firestorm. Too many, too fast, too powerful. Allahu Akbar, the missiles are coming. Find shelter, quickly. This is not a drill. This is not a simulation. Those voices were captured in a live broadcast from a journalist running along Rothschild Boulevard, just before his camera dropped, and the screen faded to black. On one side of the city, the Ministry of Interior building was in flames. On the other, Ichalov Hospital was flooded with victims. Burn injuries, shrapnel wounds, and lifeless bodies. Major roads had turned into emergency evacuation lanes, but the number of ambulances was no longer sufficient. Underground, thousands of civilians huddled inside metro stations. Children cried, mothers prayed, and the elderly stared blankly at the concrete walls. They knew this wasn't just another attack. This was the beginning of something far darker. And then silence. For 5 seconds, there was no sound, no sirens, no explosions, only the thudding heartbeat in the chest of every person in Tel Aviv. Then, the largest explosion of the night struck. A long-range missile hit the Israeli tower, the city's icon, the symbol of Israel's modernity. It exploded from the center, collapsing slowly like a house of cards, leaving behind a mushroom cloud and a long shadow on the ground. The world watched, live on television and smartphones, as a civilization trembled in front of the camera. In the military command room, the generals simply stared at one another. No instructions, no strategy, only one faint sentence from a young officer. This has never happened before. And somewhere, deep beneath a secret bunker in the Negev, Prime Minister Netanyahu stared at a monitor showing a glowing red map. Tel Aviv ablaze, Haifa blinking, Iron Dome flickering. He uttered just one word. Begin. Begin what? A counterattack? A ceasefire? Or a surrender? The answer remains unknown. But one thing is certain. Israel will never be the same again. The so-called invincible defense system is now just scrap metal staring uselessly at the sky. Dawn had broken into a gray morning, but the light that illuminated Tel Aviv wasn't from the sun. It came from raging fires and flashes of explosions. Thick smoke cloaked the remaining buildings, making the metropolitan city look like ruins from a post-apocalyptic world. And at the center of it all, the Iron Dome. Along Israel's air defense line, the system once hailed as the pride of Jewish military technology now appeared exhausted. Interceptor missiles were still being launched from their automated silos, drawing arcs of light in the sky, but far too few to stop the unrelenting waves of Iranian attacks. 4 a.m., the second wave arrived. 67 missiles from the northeast. Some launched from Iranian soil, others from hidden sites in Syria and Lebanon. These missiles were faster, more advanced, and deadlier. Multiple warheads detected. Incoming trajectory, 6 simultaneous targets. We're out of interceptors in the southwest sector. We need air support now. Inside the IDF Air Defense Command Center, chaos erupted. The computers, which once displayed a flawless defense network, now showed a map glowing red. The blue dots, representing interceptor missiles, had dropped to half their normal capacity. Then, the Iron Dome system in the southern sector went completely dark. This generator was hit directly. The operators didn't have time to escape. From that moment on, Israel's skies were wide open. Explosion after explosion danced across the Holy Land. One missile struck the Pamakim airbase, destroying drone hangars and F-35 fighter jets. Another hit the Ashdod power plant, cutting electricity to thousands of homes in Tel Aviv and surrounding areas. And one more, delivered with deadly precision, obliterated the Shin Bet intelligence headquarters, leaving a massive crater in the heart of the city. Israel from offense to defense. There were no more offensive positions. The IDF, once the most feared military force in the Middle East, could now only defend, and defend. On international news screens, for the first time, headlines read, "Israel under siege. Iron Dome breached. Israeli defense in crisis mode." Meanwhile, in a secret bunker, Netanyahu paced back and forth, his face pale, lips trembling. He looked at his top general and said, "We never thought they would go this far." The general didn't answer. He simply slid a document across the table. At the top it read, "Emergency aid request to the United States." But would the US respond? Would the world come to Israel's aid, or let it fall in the name of a new global balance? The Iron Dome had cracked, and when defense collapses, only two choices remain: strike back or fall to your knees. And that morning, Tel Aviv braced for what it feared most. The next night, no shipping, no trade, only rubble, fire, and the stench of burning metal. If Tel Aviv is Israel's economic heart, then Haifa is its lungs. For decades, this largest port city has been the gateway for everything: oil, logistics, international aid, and the commercial fleets that connect Israel to the world. Now it's all gone. 3 Shahab 3 missiles with thermobaric warheads crossed the northern skies of Israel, undetected by radar. The Iron Dome in the northern region had already been disabled 2 hours earlier. No interceptors, no alarms, just the faint hissing sound from above, followed by explosions that shook the earth. The first blast struck the Haifa oil refinery. Fuel tanks erupted like volcanoes, creating a fireball 70 meters high, visible all the way to the Lebanese border. The second struck the container port, destroying hundreds of cargo ships and sinking the main dock. Vessels flying Greek and Indian flags also went up in flames. The third and deadliest hit the Israeli naval base. Dozens of warships were damaged. Some burned, others capsized from the shockwave. Early reports estimated over 200 soldiers killed instantly. Haifa became a seafront inferno. Black smoke billowed from industrial zones. Oil leaked into the waters, creating toxic slicks that ignited on the surface. The Mediterranean Sea was no longer blue, turned black, sticky, and poisonous. On Mount Carmel, civilians who managed to flee looked down and could only weep. Their city, their homes, their future, now nothing more than a billowing black shadow. We have nowhere left to go. Even the bunkers aren't safe. We heard the ships burning from our homes. A young mother was interviewed by foreign television, holding a quietly crying baby. We used to fear dying from bombs. Now we fear not being able to live. International military analysts immediately issued a stark warning. If Haifa falls, Israel loses more than just a port. They lose logistics, fuel supplies, and strategic access to the sea. The United States had yet to respond. The European Union merely called for de-escalation. And in a single night, Israel, the nation with the most dominant naval power in the Middle East, appeared to have lost control of its own waters. From the crisis room in Tel Aviv, A final radio transmission came in from Haifa before the signal was lost. Haifa Naval Base, fully ablaze. We're pulling back personnel. We've lost. Silence. Netanyahu closed his eyes and lowered his head. On the tactical screen before him, two cities glowed in bright red. Tel Aviv, Haifa. Next, Jerusalem. The sky was still dark, but there was no time to mourn, because Iran was not finished, and Israel had no idea how to strike back. Sometimes, more deadly than missiles, is the fear behind closed doors. Beneath the city of Jerusalem, the emergency meeting room of the National Command Center had turned into a battlefield no less intense than Tel Aviv or Haifa. Around a long oval table with a glowing digital map at its center, ministers, generals, and strategic advisors exchanged glances, some filled with anxiety, others with barely restrained anger. At the end of the table sat Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, his fists clenched, his expression cold. But everyone knew he was holding back a storm inside his mind. We've lost on two fronts. When does Jerusalem fall? The voice came from the defense minister, a retired general and once loyal supporter of Netanyahu. Our Iron Dome is nearly depleted. Supply lines from Haifa are cut. The public is panicking. If this continues for 3 more days, we'll lose this country. Netanyahu stared at him sharply. I will not surrender. This isn't about surrender, the interior minister replied. This is about reality. We're being attacked from 3 directions, and the world is silent. Someone threw a document onto the table. Civilian casualties, infrastructure damage, remaining missile inventory, and a ceasefire proposal from Qatar and Turkey. Secret negotiations. Emergency mediation. Netanyahu sneered. So we beg for peace now? Iran strikes our home, and you want us to raise the white flag. The economy minister, who had remained silent until then, finally spoke up. Or we lose everything. The stock market is crashing. Banks are closing. Foreign investors are pulling out. This is no longer a military war. It's total collapse. Outside the bunker, the people no longer believe. Meanwhile, thousands flooded the streets of Jerusalem and Beersheba, carrying signs. Where is the army? Save our families. Netanyahu equals failure. The hashtag Resign Netanyahu trended across social media. Even the ultra-Orthodox settler groups, usually loyal, were now voicing their discontent. Rumors spread fast. 5 ministers were preparing to resign. A Mossad general had ceased to follow orders. An unofficial letter had been sent to Washington requesting emergency military aid, and was rejected. Netanyahu knew he was standing at the edge of history. He could choose to keep fighting and risk total destruction, or accept the bitter truth: Israel was losing. But then, he spoke a single sentence, soft, like a whisper of death. If they think I'll surrender, they don't know who I am. And with that, he gave the order for the next phase. Operation Ashes of Retribution, a full-scale counterstrike on Iran's nuclear and military facilities. Risk: global escalation. Goal: delay collapse at any cost. Outside the war room, his assistant whispered, Prime Minister, the capital is panicking. Civilians are beginning to flee to Jordan. We don't have enough transport for them. Netanyahu looked out at the sky above Jerusalem through blast-proof glass. Let them go. Those who remain will be witnesses to history. Defeat is not always declared through official broadcasts. Sometimes, the world simply reads it from a nation's silence. Morning in New York was still dark when the United Nations Security Council called for an emergency meeting. Within hours, the 15 main seats in the legendary circular chamber were filled. World leaders came not because they wanted to, but because they had to. What was happening in Israel was no longer just a regional conflict. This was the beginning of a global upheaval. Tel Aviv is paralyzed. Haifa is in flames. Jerusalem is on full alert. And the world, divided. Some remained silent, some condemned. Others calculated the chances of a new balance of power. At the UN table, the United States appeared hesitant. Its president was reluctant to send troops due to domestic election pressure. France and the United Kingdom called for a ceasefire, but refused to name Iran as the aggressor. China and Russia coolly suggested a peaceful transition in the region. A diplomatic phrase meaning, "Let Israel fall, we won't interfere." Meanwhile, Israel's ambassador was absent. Many asked, where were they? No answer ever came. Global headlines began to change their tone. Israel's pride crumbles in a week? BBC. Iran wins without setting foot on the ground. Al Jazeera. Is this the turning point in Middle Eastern history? Reuters. Even traditionally pro-Israel outlets began to waver. They questioned Netanyahu's decisions, comparing the current situation to Israel's darkest days during the Yom Kippur War, except this time without full global support. Germany, long loyal in military aid, halted all arms shipments. Canada urged its citizens to leave Israel immediately. Australia and Italy withdrew their diplomats from Tel Aviv. Israel appeared alone. More than just physical devastation, it was beginning to lose its greatest strength: global moral and political support. By afternoon, a quiet signal appeared on communication satellites. Channel opened to Qatar and Oman, two nations long known as mediators in Middle Eastern conflicts. According to intelligence leaks, Israel had secretly transmitted a signal expressing willingness for unconditional limited negotiations, a diplomatic phrase which, to analysts, meant only one thing. They were looking for a way out, not victory, but survival. The big question hangs in the air. Is Israel surrendering, or is this a trap to buy time? Will Netanyahu choose diplomacy, or press the final button? On screens across the world, hundreds of millions watched replays of the previous night's explosions, buildings collapsing, and civilians crying in the rubble of their homes. And among it all, one question echoed louder than the rest. Will Israel become the first modern nation in history to fall, not by an invading army, but by a storm of missiles alone? War isn't just about winning, it's about who writes the history afterward. In the underground command center of the Quds Force headquarters, a large screen displayed a digital map of Israel. Blinking red dots: Tel Aviv, Haifa, Ashdod, Jerusalem. General Esmail Qaani, top commander of Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps, smiled coldly. He said nothing. He simply pointed at the screen, then to northern Palestine, and finally turned around and said, "It's time to reactivate the Liberation Corridor." Iran was not alone. Since the beginning of the conflict, its network of allies, militias, factions, and underground organizations had been quietly prepared for one moment, when Israel begins to fall. And now that moment had arrived. Hezbollah in southern Lebanon mobilized. Missiles launched from the hills extended the assault into Galilee and Tiberias. The Houthis in Yemen claimed to have targeted an Israeli logistics ship in the Red Sea. Hashed al-Shabi forces in Iraq began land convoys approaching the Jordanian border. Pro-Iranian militias in Syria advanced toward the Golan Heights, a once untouchable zone. And in Gaza, Al-Qassam brigades and Palestinian Islamic Jihad raised black and green flags over the ruins of abandoned Israeli military posts. At 10 a.m., Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, appeared on national television and delivered a formal address broadcast worldwide. Today, Muslims no longer dream of the liberation of Palestine. Today, they walk upon it. The Zionists have lost their moral authority, lost their cities, lost their direction. We do not seek destruction. We seek justice. This statement was immediately interpreted as a symbolic victory. The world trembled. Several Arab nations quietly expressed support. Even Jordan and Egypt, long-standing neutral neighbors, began turning a blind eye to cross-border militia movements. Global media began adopting new terms. Israel in its post-power phase, the rise of the Tehran axis, a Middle East without Zionism? Not only that, pro-Palestinian movements flooded campuses across Europe and America. In the streets of Istanbul, Jakarta, Karachi, and Rabat, millions took to the streets, celebrating what they called the Day of the Ummah's Rise. A leaked document from Russian intelligence circles revealed an unofficial plan: power transition in southern Israel. The document outlined options for establishing a transitional Palestinian government in cooperation with moderate Arab states, with Iran as the guarantor of military stability. This was no longer a theory, no longer a threat. It was happening. And Israel? Silent. No official speech. No cabinet clarification. Only leaks suggesting that reserve troops were beginning to withdraw from the north and south. Many are asking, is Israel waiting for the right moment to strike back? Or are they quietly locking the doors from within? Before a country collapses, its voice is the first to fall, because there's nothing left to say. 2 weeks ago, Tel Aviv was the heartbeat of Israel, bustling with tech startups, 24-hour cafes, honking cars, and Mediterranean beaches crowded with tourists. Today, it's silent. No horns, no footsteps, only the hum of emergency generators, the wail of ambulances, and sobs echoing from underground shelters. The streets are littered with rubble, shattered glass, and burned-out vehicles. The smell of charred flesh still lingers in the air. Towering buildings stand tall, but many are empty. Residents have fled. Power is out across most districts. Water flows only 4 hours a day. A young girl sits on the sidewalk hugging her doll. Beside her, her mother stares at the sky. She keeps asking when school will reopen. "I have no answer," she tells a journalist. "We don't even know if this country will still exist tomorrow." Haifa is no better. After the port was destroyed and the oil refinery burned, the city feels like it's dying slowly. Many residents tried to flee north, but the main highway was struck by missiles and is impassable. Humanitarian aid hasn't arrived. The military is focused on defending Jerusalem. Medical volunteers work day and night with insufficient supplies. Some have given up and gone home. "We can't save everyone," said a French doctor who chose to stay, and no country dares to come help. In Jerusalem, the holy city of three faiths, prayers have become the last remaining weapon. Thousands are hiding underground, especially around the old city. Churches, synagogues, and mosques are now shelters for refugees from across the country. Tensions are rising. Small clashes break out between frustrated civilians and soldiers. The last remnants of Israel's defense are concentrated here, but they are exhausted. Near the Western Wall, an old rabbi whispers to his student, "If this isn't the end of days, then it is surely the test of them." A nation without a voice. No live broadcasts from the government. No speeches of comfort. Only once did Netanyahu's voice appear, through a shortwave radio transmission. "People of Israel, hold on. God will not abandon his people." But even that voice trembled. While Israelis live in fear, reports from occupied territories say Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad have begun forming local governing structures, organizing food distribution, imposing curfews, and setting up civilian checkpoints. Some Palestinians are calling it the end of the occupation. But many Israelis are calling it the day we became refugees in our own land. Time slows, but fear grows. Days feel like weeks. Nights seem eternal. Israelis sleep in silence, emergency bags by their beds, unsure whether they'll wake up alive. No one speaks of victory anymore. Now all anyone hopes for is survival. The end of a nation doesn't always come with the sound of explosions. Sometimes it arrives in silence, and one decision that cannot be undone. The underground National Command Center in Jerusalem was now manned by only half its original staff. Some had fallen, others had resigned. At the central table, Benjamin Netanyahu sat alone. In front of him, a red folder marked with an operational code. Eshkol, the fall protocol. In his hands, two options. Sign the ceasefire agreement brokered by Qatar, Oman, and the UN. Consequence: de facto recognition of defeat. Occupied territories to be handed over, East Jerusalem to be negotiated, Haifa to be vacated. Reject it and initiate last spear. A tactical nuclear counterstrike on Iranian and Syrian military sites. Consequence: global escalation. Potential outbreak of World War III. He stared at the digital map on his desk. Red. Everything red. From the Mediterranean Sea to the Red Sea. Nothing left in blue except Jerusalem. The world waits. In New York, the UN Secretary General had already prepared a press room for a major announcement. In Washington, the US President held his breath, issuing a stark warning. If Israel presses the nuclear button, we will not stand by them. Russia and China were on high alert. Turkey and Iran were already drafting a new regional map. The Gulf states quietly moved toward a shared consensus. A Middle East without Israel. At 10:11 p.m. Israel time, a diplomatic transmission was received by the United Nations. Brief, toneless, no speech. The State of Israel accepts the proposal for full cessation of hostilities and is prepared to enter structured negotiations regarding territorial and population status. Effective immediately. No mention of defeat, no word of surrender, but the whole world knew this was the quietest admission of defeat in modern history. Global reaction. Tehran erupted into applause in parliament. Ramallah and Gaza celebrated. Palestine has been reborn. Washington and London declared. Stability has returned. But on the streets of Jerusalem, people only stared into the dark sky. They asked, "What is left of Israel? Is this the end? Or the beginning of something else?" The next morning, the sun rose over Jerusalem, but there were no cheers, no declarations of freedom, only rubble, only mothers searching for their children, only aging veterans staring at a torn flag over the ruins of their command post. In a small home in southern Israel, a child asked his father, "Do we still have a country, Dad?" The father was silent. He didn't answer. He just held his child, tighter than ever before.